Yeah, the problem, it's true. I mean, if you look at the histories of the world, especially the Western world, the victors write the histories, and we're given, but really it's horror shows. It's just a history of horror as to how the ordinary people were treated. And one war after another, and various peasants' wars and all the rest of it, trying to live and survive. The thing that's going to come up again with the food riots, same stuff all over again. And the big churches they never told them to stand up for themselves. In fact, the churches were always on the side of the families who controlled the countries. And it's no wonder that people eventually, mainly in Europe, gradually got so sick of the mainstream churches that they completely dropped out. And once they dropped out, their children were at risk, which was understood by those who controlled, of being led by other forces. And so they made sure they gave you a culture industry to guide them, to take over from religion, and then use it. It was even easier because religion was static. Religion was very good for keeping populations static and well-behaved. However, it was written into religions that man and woman were sacred. Life was sacred, and they could knock that one down. There was always a dilemma when they told you to go and kill people abroad, but back home it was a no-no. Life was sacred, so you had that double-think problem. And we know that the elite always wanted to bring down the populations, especially after the 1700s. And so they had to get rid of religion, and then they replaced it with the cultural techniques and industries to guide them, well-financed again from the top people, the top families. And it's much easier now. They've created an atheistic society, and they've even given them a New Age movement, which many thousands have fallen into. Is based on a mix of Hinduism, reincarnation, and so on. And they're using that to guide them to the next phase of the new humanity. They're looking forward to a lot of New Agers all being one and having new bodies and stuff like that. They think they're all going to get saved because they're all so special. But of course they're going to be used and walk into the extermination chambers at the right time, chanting Om in unison. So the cultural industry is taken over, but inside every individual, I don't care who they are, you have these things we call instincts, and we know what we do personally, if it's right to us or not, regardless of the culture around you. And they teach children, very young children, if an adult touches you in a certain way and it feels uncomfortable, report them. Now, how come children are able to do that, but adults are told not to, that everything's okay? Because it's culturally okay, you see. But deep down inside you still have the same thought as a child. If this feels uncomfortable, there's something wrong here. So there is such a thing to you as right and wrong. The New Age philosophies, which are promoted from the top, the new religion, are antagonistic to the old religions, which did have definite rights and wrongs. Rules which had very good reasons and purposes behind them for the survival of humanity, and all segments of humanity too. But in this new eugenic society, with science being the new priesthood, they've given them the New Age to follow and mixed it with gobbledygook and Hinduism and part science fiction. And they put out leaders amongst them, just as they always have done, to guide them all, well-funded leaders, into this new age. But I don't care who you are, as I say, if you don't know what's right and wrong, then you have no mind of your own at all. You're totally conditioned. If you accept anything, you're conditioned. If you really truly believe in moral relativity, where anything goes and everything's okay, that also means that it's okay for the elite to decide what they're going to do with you. You can't argue with that, can you? That's your reasoning. They're using your reasoning. And you can find a natural faith yourself without tossing all the old babies out with the bathwater. Because there's truth, eternal truth, in all the old established religions. It was a dogma that was piled on top to keep the people subdued and obedient that did the main churches in and under, apart from the infiltrations from the high Masonic groups and so on. And believe you me, if you look at the top churches in America and Canada and Britain. See who founded them. And they were all the highest Masons, you can see. Every section of Christianity. And you know who put the Novo Orders, the new order, out for the Catholic Church after Vatican II? Who put the whole thing together when they did it with the Latin Mass? There's 2 archbishops and 6 Protestants, all Masons, who designed the new Mass for the Catholics. Because the Catholic Church was all completely taken over by them. All New Agers, all High Masons. And this is ongoing, and I get a lot of stuff. I know I'm right into what's happening deep within the New Age, who's funding them big time. I've met people from the Canadian government in high positions who have these strange little jobs, but they go around the world, traveling around the world at New Age meetings. One of them at the United Nations told me, this woman, she said, what was happening in the Middle East. I said, well, is it right to go over there and slaughter people, just to get an agenda through and standardize them? So she said, well, you got to realize those people, she says, decided to come back in those bodies at this time in life. So it's their fate. And then our karma, she's talking about karma. If you want religious fanaticism that can actually rationalize murder, slaughter, she was one of them. And she will sleep well at night. A complete, total believer. Scares the hell out of you. They're actually out there in high positions. Yeah. It's like, that's how they rationalize cripples and so on. Well, they decided to come back in that body to pay for their karma. Don't help them, by the way, because it'll rub off on yours. That's why India was always in the mess it's in. Incredible logic.
Hi folks, I'm back cutting through the matrix, and I call it matrix because it's a system where with lots and lots of rooms in it, you might say, and floors in all directions, and most folk go through their lives never questioning anything at all because you're indoctrinated from birth, really. Your parents indoctrinated you because they were indoctrinated. They don't know. And as I say, all young mammals look towards the elders to warn them against dangers. And if it doesn't happen, then those young mammals will be easy prey to predators. And it's the same with people too. If you're not told to beware and watch out, and that what you're taught in school isn't necessarily true, and very often it's not true, because they're always changing history, then of course you have no idea. You'll accept it and take it for granted. And you have your peer group, your generational group, who are all indoctrinated in the same way. And so you can talk amongst yourselves and all agree with your indoctrination. It all seems quite natural. And everything is propaganda. And I've gone through even the Royal Institute for International Affairs so many times before, because it was formed to be the embryo of world government and to take over the world. And it was based in the city of London. It's still on the go, of course, big time, and they have societies in every nation across the world today. And one of the American branches is called the Council on Foreign Relations. So they supply all the journalists. Winston Churchill even talked about the fact that they, at that time during World War II, under different names, because they hadn't come out with their official name at that time, but he said that I'm surprised these guys have helped foment wars and even dragged Britain into the wars. And then, because they're so wealthy and they own the publishing companies, they then write history for the children to learn, a fake history of why things happened. So we're living in intense propaganda, and that's the term, the real name for it, propaganda. It's the art of running millions and millions of people's minds without them ever knowing, and getting them to do or think or behave in the way that you want them to think or behave. And it's quite a simple thing when you have pretty well total control of the world's media. And the culture industry is a big, big part of it too, that churns out the movies with predictive programming, etc., and all the dramas that you soak up through your lifetime watching television. Now, I've mentioned Jacques Ellul quite a few times, a great philosopher and historian, who churned out books to do with so many topics, but mainly along how men think, how people think, and again, propaganda. And what he said was, in one of his books, was called The Formation of Men's Attitudes, he says, propaganda must also furnish an explanation for all happenings. That's what your media furnishes you every day. a key to understanding the whys and the reasons for economic and political developments. News loses its frightening character when it offers information for which the listener already has a ready explanation in his mind. You've already been prepped, you see, but with previous news, or for which he can easily find one. The great force of propaganda lies in giving modern man all-embracing, simple explanations and massive doctrinal causes, without which he could not live with the news. And it's true, if you were to suddenly have amnesia, and you'd have maybe a recall to do with previous wars and things, and how, say, for Nazis were bad, they wanted to take over the world. And then, but because of the amnesia, you didn't know what your own country was anymore. And you saw what your country was up to, or where you were living, what it was up to, with fomenting wars, geopolitics across the Middle East, one country after another. You'd have to put them in the same category as Hitler. Understand that? Or the Soviet Union has expanded their empire. Same thing. And slaughtering people across the world. That'd be a breakdown if you were actually sane and came to that conclusion. A lot of folk actually do have breakdowns when they realize what their country happens to really, really be and what they're doing. So how can one person in one other country be really nasty and evil when your own people are doing the same thing? And even on a bigger scale, by the way. And slaughtering folk across the world, plundering the resources, and giving you full propaganda at home as to the reasons why they're doing it. Always blaming the guy they're going to invade, of course. Always. Always, you see. Simple explanations and massive doctrinal causes without which you could not live with the news, says Jacques Ellul. So, if you can remember that, you'll understand why your media is all in collusion with the same stories on every topic, especially with Syria, and you got the same thing. We had it with Libya. We had it with Iraq, Afghanistan, and so on. And they want to also do the same with Iran. They even publish the countries they want to take out back in the 90s with the project for the new American century. And they're going through the same ones. And most folk have no memory, so they can't put it together. They think it's just a happening. You know, the hippies used to say it's a happening. Things just happen, you see. Now, it says here too, modern propaganda reaches individuals enclosed in the mass and as participants in that mass. Yet it also aims at the crowd, but not only as a body composed of individuals. What does it mean? First of all, that the individual never is considered as an individual, but always in terms of what he has in common with others, such as his motivations, his writings, or his myths. And what he means by that, you see, your whole culture is given to everyone around you, especially your peer group and your generation, of course. And that's what you do. You bounce off ideas to other people around you to see if they accept it. And if it's accepted by them as well and promoted by them, then you must be quite sane. You understand? Whereas if you bounce something out there and you've broken out of your conditioning, you'll see them all stare at you like you're crazy. It's very, very simple. And he also said propaganda tends to make the individual live in a separate world. That's the idea. He must not have outside points of reference. So they chuck real histories away into the academia, because academia is all on board with this big global agenda. He must not be allowed a moment of meditation or reflection. Instead, successful propaganda will occupy every moment of the individual's life. Through posters and loudspeakers when he's out walking, through the radio and newspapers at home, through meetings and movies in the evening. And that was from Propaganda, the Formation of Men's Attitudes, is a chapter. And that's what you get. You're bombarded with simple explanations as to why the world is the way it is and why your government must do what they tell you that it must do. And of course they use all of you as an army and as the taxpayers to fund it all for the gang at the top that already have control of your countries. And they've had it for a long, long time. An awful long time. He also said that a related point central in Ellul's thesis is that modern propaganda cannot work without education. You must have your basic indoctrination first. That's so important for subsequent propaganda to take effect. He thus reverses the widespread notion that education is the best prophylactic against propaganda. On the contrary, he says education, or what usually goes by that word in the modern world, is the absolute prerequisite for propaganda. It says, in fact, education is largely identical with what he calls pre-propaganda, the conditioning of minds with vast amounts of incoherent information already dispensed for ulterior purposes and posing as facts and as education. He says, too, to make the organization of propaganda possible, the media must be concentrated. See, they're all the top characters in media, newspapers and television, and definitely the owners of them, are all members of one organization, the Council on Foreign Relations. One organization runs the world's media. And he says, concentrated, and the number of news agencies reduced. The press brought under single control. Well, most of them get all their information from Reuters, you see. And radio and film and movies monopolies established. Well, we've had that for how long in Hollywood? Radio and film monopolies established. The effect will still be greater if the various media are concentrated in the same hands. And they are, you see. And that was also from the information of men's attitudes. And he also says, too, Stalinist propaganda was in great measure founded on Pavlov's theory of the conditioned reflex. Hitlerian propaganda was in great measure founded on Freud's theory of repression and libido. American propaganda is founded on great measure on John Dewey, his theory of teaching. And so he goes through all the methods by which you've already been brainwashed, you understand. And he says, too, each medium is particularly suited to a certain type of propaganda. The movies and human contacts are the best social media for sociological propaganda in terms of social climate, slow infiltration, progressive inroads, and overall integration. Public meetings and posters are more suitable tools for providing shock propaganda, intense but temporary, leading to immediate action. So you have all the gestures, they get the fists up and the whole bit, you know, and these drawings. The press tends to shape general views. Radio is likely to be an instrument of international action and psychological warfare, whereas the press is used domestically. Direct propaganda aimed at modifying opinions and attitudes must be preceded by propaganda that is sociological in character. Sociological propaganda can be compared to plowing, direct propaganda to sowing. You cannot do one without doing the other first. And that was also from his book, Propaganda, The Formation of Men's Attitudes. So, you understand, most folk are living in a dream world. They don't know. They don't know. They think they're sane. But as I say, stand back and say, compare what your country is doing. Compare the propaganda you get on a daily basis with experts always coming on, telling you why you must go invade this country, and then the one after it, and the one after that, and the one after that, and so on. When you say invade, you know, they're slaughtering lots of people. And you've paid for it all through your tax money. As you at home are put under pretty well what is generally called martial law. With ID cards and everything. Can't you get it? How can you say, okay, Hitler was bad, Stalin was bad, our guys are good? It's the same techniques, same kind of lies, very simplistic propaganda. And everyone goes along with it because that's all you get access to. Hi folks, we're back and we're cutting through the matrix. Perception is what everything really runs on and how we perceive things. And even in ancient times, they used to alter perception. The priests did it, at least for the ancient people in the old pagan times, as they call paganism. But you'll find that at one time the priests would, in other countries too, even in Latin American countries in ancient times, as well as in the Middle East, the priests would, who'd studied the stars for God knows how long, we'll never ever know just how long humankind really is, at least for knowledge-wise, that is. Civilization didn't start with the city, and it didn't start really just with the writing that we know of. It started long, long before in previous times, even previous disasters. But the thing is, the priests always knew the art of controlling the general public in any country. And they eventually taught the people that if they didn't hand in their goodies and toss a few diamonds or jewelry their way, or some gold, silver, or something that sparkled and had some value, then the sun wouldn't come up. And they would do the ritual singing to the sun every morning just before dawn broke. And of course, people were too afraid really to deny them because they were terrified of the darkness. In ancient times, darkness was a scary thing because you didn't know what was coming at you in the dark, either people or animals, kind of much like today. But anyway, that's how they drew in the loot from the public. And eventually, after a generation or two, of course, it's quite natural. The children grow up thinking it's all quite natural. These guys bring the sun up every day, and they're awfully important for your survival. Today, it's a bit different. As scientists, of course, who've waged a 500-year war on the old religions, and they've taken over the place of the priests because they don't even have to name them now a lot of the times in articles that they hand out to the newspapers. They just say experts say, and a specialist and so said, and that's all we have to hear. Exactly as Bertrand Russell said in one of his books back in the 1940s, they would train the public to listen to experts until they couldn't think for themselves. And the trick to that is that you don't perceive for yourself. Same thing, you alter perception on things. You find the same thing with behavior modification. It's really geared towards altering the person's perception on any event or thing that's happening. And that happens also with whole populations via the media, something that Bernays knew awfully well because he gave America its consumerist society, and he was a big manager. He worked alongside presidents to give thoughts to the people to get them on board for wars, that type of thing. He was an excellent con man. He just knew the tricks of the trade, and obviously he had been taught since a very early age to do so. So these are sciences which have always existed, kept quiet, initially through priests in ancient times, and eventually up to the Enlightenment. They started to break through then, but still kept pretty secret amongst a few. And then it carries on to today, because knowledge is power. And even the old alchemists, under the guise of hocus pocus for their masses to believe, were actually teaching their disciples how to conquer the mind, basically, how to con people, how people really did behave, especially in the mass type situation, the crowd as they called it. And these techniques came down through the ages. Now they're, of course, sciences. And they always said, too, in the old alchemists, that their real secrets were making things like explosives and stuff like that, things which really did work. They would sell dearly to kings and queens or governments because it would give them power over governments. And that's actually how it is today, in a sense. All governments now look towards the experts, the scientists, for all advice, and they outsource, as I like to call it, all their stuff to all these different organizations that eventually are, of course, are private organizations, and you end up with this new feudal system that Carl Quigley said was the aim and the goal of the Council on Foreign Relations. Always a new feudal system where the CEOs would be basically the captains, and the captains of industry would be the new feudal overlords. And we already have that. Governments really are pretty helpless today because the guys that go in there don't really know very much. What good is a degree in law? And most of them are lawyers, of course. If you were going in to be appointed the Minister of Health or the Minister of Physics or something like that, I mean, it's no use at all. And so now, of course, they're openly bringing on environmentalists and so-called specialists onto the teams. And you don't elect them, of course, they're just appointed. And they now have a big say, a big clout, because of the new high priest, you see, of government. And we know that government is really a charade. If you've been listening to this program or broadcast, I should say, over the years, government really has always really been a sham. Francis Bacon put that out quite succinctly when he wrote a kind of a treatise or basically a resume to the king, and to show how smart he was at conning the public. And he said that the public really should always be kept in the dark, basically, as to the true machinations of where the government's really going for, the goals of government. Nothing has changed. The trick, of course, is to alter again perceptions by giving you a massive media, a variety, you think, of media, in order that so that you all chat about the same things. Very simple trick. You're all chatting about the same things. Your opinion's already given to you via the media, or you'll actually follow it to the desired conclusion, each story, for instance, and that's how they're written. There's no real honest news out there at all on anything, and the rest of it is just trivia, but all the big stuff is kept out